guys, Joe Bankert here. Congratulations. You finished 3 weeks of philosophy. I know you never thought this day would come. 3 whole weeks. You didn't die. You've made it in one piece. It's great. Maybe I could send out, a bunch of T-shirts. Congratulations, I survived. Found philosophical foundations of spiritual formation or something. But seriously, philosophy is not easy. I know that. Again, it's like exercising a new set of muscles. Anytime you do that, you're really sore the next day, and it takes working them out over and over before you stop being really sore. And so philosophy is like a new set of muscles, and it's painful at first, and hopefully it's getting a little easier. We're heading into the halfway mark, and so I'm sort of excited at the direction the course is going. I want to put in perspective sort of where we're heading. We've been talking about what it means to be a human person. I in no way want to convert you away from dualism. That was not my intent. I am not a dualist. I think there are good philosophical and theological reasons for rejecting dualism, but that's okay if we disagree. I advocate, again, a more Constitution view. But again, you're not graded on your conclusions. I care that you are thoughtful, but certainly it's okay that we disagree. In that vein, I want to highlight the value of embodiment, of incarnation, that God cares about creation. God is in the process of restoring and redeeming all of creation, that human beings are at least in part embodied people with bodies and brains that have a real impact on the things that we do. And as a result, we're sort of going to take this view of the human person and begin to talk about ethics, character formation, and virtue. Now, what I want you to be doing as we're going through these next few weeks is to be thinking to yourself, how does this notion of character formation that we're learning about and virtue parallel spiritual formation? Where might the similarities lie between developing character and virtue and developing one's spirit? And of course, where are the dissimilarities? Where are the places of difference? But that's sort of where we're going. I'm making an argument that developing one's character is developing one's spirit, and I make that connection because of how I view the human person, which we've been covering the last 2 weeks. So there's a connection between how we view the human person and how we look at spiritual formation. But I also want to give you freedom to completely disagree with me in the midst of this, right? So we're going to be dealing with virtue. This is often, virtue theory is given credit, or credit is given to Aristotle as the founder. And so that's what you're going to be reading this week and what I'm going to be talking about. But there have been many people who have advocated virtue theory throughout history. Some of them are like Aristotle, right? He's Greek, not Christian. He was before Christ, but part of a different culture and religious group. Other people who have advocated virtue theory have been Christians, like Thomas Aquinas, Stanley Hauerwas, N.T. Wright, and others. So we have this long tradition of virtue theory, but we're going to sort of start with the founder. And I'm going to contrast rule-based ethics with virtue or character-based ethics. And it's 2 different ways of looking at morality. I'm going to start with rule-based ethics, right? In rule-based ethics, what you have is you have a rule or a principle, a value, something that helps you make a decision in a particular set of circumstances. What is the right thing to do? Give me a moral rule or principle that helps tell me what to do. An example of a rule-based ethic would be utilitarianism, which advocates the principle of utility. The principle of utility says, do that which maximizes happiness and minimizes unhappiness for the greatest number of people, right? Maximize happiness, minimize unhappiness. And the utilitarian says, in any situation, take this moral principle, apply it, and it'll tell you what to do. So for instance, if I'm a general in an army, and I'm at war and I'm trying to figure out what to do, and I say, well, what if I bomb this bridge, and my informants tell me that most likely around 200 people will die, But if we don't do the bridge, instead if we sneak around and maybe attack a beachhead and come on by land, only 100 are estimated to die. Well, the general says 100 deaths is better than 200 deaths. That maximizes happiness and minimizes unhappiness for the most people. We'll go by beach. And so you implement a principle, and that tells you what the right thing to do is. It's a rule. Utilitarianism is actually very popular in the United States. It's very pragmatic. You look at the consequences, what's going to lead to the best consequences overall for the most people, that's what you do. Character-based ethic is, in a character-based ethic, one is given advice about what kind of person to become. So this is very different, right? Rule-based ethic gives you rules to tell you what the right thing to do is. Character-based ethics focuses on what kind of person you should become. It's not what I should do, it's who I should be. Very different, right? And so we're going to be emphasizing sort of virtue ethics or character-based ethics. So again, character-based ethic. What kind of person should one become? Virtue ethics is not interested in giving advice about what to do in specific situations. Rather, virtue ethics is more concerned about our general dispositions of character. Am I honest, courageous, loving, faithful, a good steward? Do I have these general dispositions of character? And they're going to care more about that and cultivating that than in giving me some set of principles or rules to follow to tell me what the right thing to do is. Often it's argued that if you're a certain kind of person, you'll know what you should do. If I develop a disposition of honesty, the virtue of honesty, I don't need a rule about lying because it's natural for me to tell the truth. So instead of focusing on rules, we should focus on character. An example might help highlight the difference here. So imagine two husbands, Bill and Fred. Bill and Fred both stay faithful to their wives. So from an action standpoint, they both do the right thing. They remain faithful. From a rule-based ethic, right, they both are following the principle or the rule of staying faithful to your wife, not cheating. From a utilitarian perspective, they're maximizing happiness. They're limiting damage by staying faithful, whatever rule you want to implement. But imagine Bill thinks about cheating on his wife all of the time. He's constantly tempted. He constantly lusts. He's very flirtatious with women at work and other things. But because he's able to summon enough willpower, he avoids committing adultery, and he ends up staying faithful, although he has a wandering eye. But now imagine Fred. Fred doesn't really think about cheating on his wife that much. Sure, from time to time, there might be a sense of lust here or there, but overall, he avoids such things. He doesn't flirt with women at work, but instead, his whole demeanor is one that says, I'm taking it off the market, right? Bill and Fred both stay faithful to their wives. But if you're a woman, who would you rather be married to? There's a big difference in terms of their character. So ethics is more than just what I do or what rules I follow. It's also about what's going on internally. Jesus sort of emphasizes this at certain points, right? It's not just those that commit adultery, but those that lust in their heart, right? Those that harbor lust in their heart have already committed adultery. Jesus cares not only with what we do or do not do, but also what's inside of us. What do we desire? What is our character really like? And so character ethics is going to sort of focus there. Rule-based ethics tells you what to do in a given situation. But virtue ethics, or character-based ethics, tells you what to do in order to become the kind of person equipped to do the right thing. And these are very different, right? I think all of us can point to examples where we knew the right thing to do. We had knowledge. I should do this, or I should not do that. But we still did it anyway. Or we still failed to do it anyway. Even though we knew the right thing to do, we didn't do it. Character-based ethics, they're interested in telling you what kinds of things you need to do that will form you into a certain kind of person that will equip you to actually do the right thing. So virtue ethics, as an example, is interested in saying, if you do these things, you will develop courage. Once you develop courage, that will equip you to be courageous in the world, right? So it's not just, oh, here's a rule that tells you you ought to be courageous. Okay, but that doesn't really help me if I'm a coward. Instead, character-based ethics says, no, you have to take baby steps to develop a certain virtue, in this case, courage. Once that happens, now you have the equipment, the tools necessary to enact the virtue of courage in the world. So let me give you a couple of my favorite analogies to maybe help you again with this notion of character formation. One of them is cooking. I am a terrible cook, but my wife's a really, really good cook. So when I do try to cook things, which from time to time I do for her birthday, sometimes I try to make her birthday cakes or a dinner, maybe on Valentine's Day or something, I'm like, hey, I'll cook. I have to get a recipe. So I've got to call my mom or her mom or my friend Billy, who's a good cook. I've got to call somebody and get a recipe, right? So I get it, I print it off typically from my email, and then I follow it to a T. I'm like all nervous, cracking eggs, measuring things. Oh, I hope it works out, right? So I'm really trying just to follow the rules step by step, but it never really turns out quite right. It's always okay, but it's never great. But if you watch my wife, she's like, she doesn't even measure things. She's like tossing things into the pot by eye. She's tasting it. Oh, I think it needs this or that. You know, sometimes she'll be in the other room and she'll tell me like, hey, Joe, does it look right? And I'm like, I don't know. What's it supposed to look like? I don't even know. But she knows. She knows what it looks like, tastes like. If things go wrong, she knows how to improvise, right? She's learned these skills. She knows how to bake, fry, saute. She's accumulated these skills. Well, how did that happen? In many respects, she has an Italian grandmother. She calls her a Nuni. She goes and watches her, asks her about family recipes, practices, right? She watches someone who's done it for longer, and then she just mimics what her Nuni does. And over time, she's done this enough, it's just become part of her. It's second nature to her that she can do it. But it took a lot of work to get to that point. I'm not there. I just got to follow the rules, the recipe. Well, this is in some ways similar to virtue, right? When we're young and children and adolescents, we might need rules to follow. Do these things. But over time, we have to move beyond that. We have to internalize this so that it becomes part of our character, so that it's second nature that we're honest, loving, kind. We enact justice and courage. That these things become part of us, and so when we come into a situation, we know what's required because we've developed a certain kind of character that knows what's required in this situation. Just like my wife comes into a kitchen and sort of knows what's required, sees and hears and smells and has done it enough where she can improvise. And Jesus sort of reminds me of this, you know. Sometimes he steps into a situation and says, this woman needs to be forgiven. Whoever has not sinned, cast the first stone. But in the next situation, Jesus is whipping people out of the temple, right? Calling them robbers and all kinds of nasty names. He knows what's required because he's developed a particular kind of character that lets him enact the virtues in the world. It's more of an art than a science. We want to think of ethics like a science. What are the rules? What are the principles? But it's more like an art, and we have a certain character that knows what's required, right? Or you can think of this like athletics. For any of you that are athletes, if you think of basketball, at first, when you're dribbling, dribbling it off your foot, you're dribbling it out of bounds, you're like, I don't know what to do. But over time, it becomes second nature. You do it enough, over and over and over. It just is part of you. Well, think about Kobe Bryant. Do you think that guy's thinking about dribbling? No, he just dribbles. He's looking at the court, seeing if someone's open. He's reacting to the defender in front of him. But in no way is he thinking about dribbling because he's done it so much. Same with thing when he shoots. He's not thinking, where's my elbow, where's my hand, where's the ball. He just shoots it, man. He just does it because he's practiced a million times in the gym. Well, virtue and character is the same. You do something over and over and over again, and pretty soon it becomes second nature. You don't have to think about it because you've practiced so much. That's what we want to talk about with character. How do I internalize the virtues so that they come out naturally, right? Second nature. I hope these examples help as you move from rules to character. Basketball players are not thinking about the rules. They're not thinking about the out-of-bounds line. They're not thinking about traveling. They know them, right? Because it's just they've played the game so much. All right. Another important concept with regard to virtue, character formation, is teleology, a sense of telos. Telos is just a fancy word that means purpose, goal, or aim. What am I aiming at? What is my purpose here? Right? What is my telos? Aristotle's notion of ethics, and typically virtue ethics in all of its forms, is fundamentally teleological. For Aristotle, everything that exists has a telos. Okay? Everything. Virtue is no different. Virtue comes when a thing fulfills its purpose with excellence. So everything has a purpose. Virtue is when we fulfill that purpose with excellence. So for instance, an acorn, the telos of an acorn is to become an oak tree. If the acorn fulfills its telos with excellence, then it is a virtuous acorn. If an acorn becomes an excellent oak tree, that acorn has performed its telos virtuously. It is a virtuous acorn, right? A knife's telos is to cut things. If a knife cuts with excellence, it is a virtuous knife, right? Virtuous, performing one's telos with excellence. Aristotle says the human telos is to be rational. The way he comes to this is, what is the thing that humans do better than everything else? The reason a knife's telos is to cut is that is what it does better than anything else. Humans reason better than any other animal. So for Aristotle, that is our telos. And to the extent that we perform it with excellence, we develop virtue. We're going to come back to this because the Greek sense of rationality is a little bit different than the way we think of rationality. But it is going to play a role in virtue and character formation. Okay? But why is teleology important for ethics at all? Right? What is so important about having a telos with regard to morality? This is something I want you to think about for a second, and then we'll talk a little bit more. What about teleology? What does that add? What does that contribute to teleology? So here's the deal. I want you to think of this like an archer aiming at a bullseye. Right? That's my telos. I'm an archer. Right? If I have a clear telos, in this case a target, it becomes very easy for me to make judgments. Did the arrow hit the target or did it miss? Well, with ethics, teleology provides us with the same thing. If I know what my moral telos is, then I can see pretty clearly, did my action hit the telos, what I was aiming at, or did it miss? So then I can make moral judgments. This action led toward my moral telos. It propelled me towards it. It's a good action. This other action moved me further away from my telos. It hindered my progress toward my moral telos. Therefore, it's an immoral action. So it gives us a standard to judge by. So teleology is very important. Okay? We're going to come back to both rationality and this notion of moral telos. This is all sort of lumped together, but I also, in the midst of this, want to talk about means and ends. In the chapter you're going to be reading in Aristotle, he talks a lot about sort of means and ends. Instrumental value. Something has instrumental value when we value it because it brings us something else we value. We value these things as a means to other things we value. So if something has an instrumental value, it's not an end, therefore it's not the telos, it's not that we're aiming. Things that we value instrumentally, we value because they lead to something else that we value, maybe our telos, right? Telos represents an end, a goal. Instrumental value represents a means to some other goal. So for instance, money. No one values the paper that money is printed on. We use money as an instrument to get other things we value, like TVs or houses or cars or food. So money does not have a sense of its own value. It has an instrumental value because we use it to get something else. So think of like instruments, like a hammer. I value a hammer because of what it can do. It can hammer in nails. It can help me build things. We value money because of what it can do. It brings us other things we value. We use it as a means to other ends. It's interesting because then if I said, well, does a car have intrinsic value? Money can buy me a car, so I value money instrumentally. But what about a car? No, that's still an instrumental value because now I'm going to use my car to get me places. So I'm using my car as an instrument to some other end. So we use money to get to a car, we use a car for transportation. At some point, if we track this line, though, we're going to run into an end, an ultimate telos. And there we run into what we call intrinsic value. If we value something intrinsically, we value it for its own sake. Not because of what it brings us, but because it has value in and of itself. It is an end. When we talk about an ultimate telos, we're typically talking about landing on something that has intrinsic value. Right? So we use a lot of other things as an instrument to get to this thing we value intrinsically. What sorts of things have intrinsic value? Right? Money doesn't. The car didn't. But there are lots of other things in our lives. Maybe relationships, love, God, truth. For Aristotle, the ultimate end, that thing which has intrinsic value, is happiness. Eudaimonia, right? This Greek word, eudaimonia. We translate it often as happiness. I assume your translation is happiness. For Aristotle, this is the ultimate end. This is the thing that has intrinsic value. I don't value money intrinsically, it brings me a car. I don't value a car intrinsically, it provides transportation. But transportation gives me a sense of freedom, and that makes me happy. I feel empowered, right? So there's a sense in which at some point we end with, well, that happiness. Money brings us things. Those things bring us a sense of peace, stability, comfort, or happiness. Even relationships. We value our partners because in some sense we get a sense of joy, happiness, or fulfillment from that, for Aristotle. Now there might be other things that have intrinsic value as well, but for Aristotle this is the primary thing. And so the goal of the human life is happiness. Now something to be really clear about. Here happiness does not mean a subjective feeling of pleasure. I eat chocolate ice cream and it makes me happy. Aristotle is not interested in that. Eudaimonia is really about well-being, human flourishing. Flourishing might be the best way to think of it. What does it mean to flourish as a human? To participate in real well-being. So there might be things we take pleasure in that have nothing to do with happiness or flourishing, like drugs. People that do drugs can take pleasure in them for that time, but they're actually moving you further away from well-being and flourishing. So Aristotle is not talking about pleasure here. He's talking about really what does it mean to be a fulfilled human, a full and complete human, right? That's the ultimate telos. That's what we aim at, okay? All right, so now it's time. What is the relationship between rationality, virtue, and happiness? This is key. This might be some of the most important things to piece together what's going on in the reading from Aristotle. You can't intentionally aim at flourishing or well-being. Like, I want to be happy, right? You don't just wake up and say, that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to flourish. Instead, we aim at other things, and flourishing, happiness sort of comes along for the ride. Okay? So we know what our ultimate telos is. How do we get there? For Aristotle, you cannot be happy if you're not virtuous. The happy person, the flourishing person, is the virtuous person. They are intimately linked. So if I embody virtue, and I do it consistently, I will be a flourishing human. I will have achieved my ultimate telos. So I aim at courage, temperance, justice, right? And to the extent that I can embody those things, I will become a flourishing human and achieve my ultimate telos. Rationality allows us to know that this is true. Being a rational creature allows me to understand what the virtues are, how to attain them, how to achieve them, and I see that they directly lead me to happiness. So for the Greeks, it is irrational to be a drug addict because you should know that this drives pleasure but not real human flourishing. And since you know that, it is irrational to continue to participate in such behavior, right? The rational person recognizes it, seeks virtue, to the extent that they attain it, they attain human flourishing. I think this is just true. The happiest people I know are those that embody virtue. We have so many examples of people that had every pleasure, every desire met. Money, women or men, sex, drugs, fame, movie stars, athletes, and yet they're miserable. And they're not flourishing. And yet we have these examples of people that have very limited resources and money, and yet they give of their gifts, they cultivate virtue, and they have a real sense in which they're flourishing. Can you see the parallel between developing character and spiritual formation? Right? I hope. So Aristotle gives a definition of happiness. He talks about it throughout, but in the reading, right? Happiness is an exercise of the soul. For Aristotle, the soul is the rational part of humans. So happiness is an exercise of reason in accordance with virtue. Right? Beautiful. I want to talk a little bit about desire as well. This separates rule-based ethics from character-based ethics even further. First-order desires are often thought of those desires that are immediate. I want to have sex. I am hungry. I want to survive, and I want safety. Very primal, right there on the surface. Second-order desires are those things that we wish we wanted, we wish we desired, because we know that they're right. First order and second order. Some examples. I wished I wanted the salad. My second order desire knows I should eat healthy. I wished I wanted the salad, but my first order desire really wants the French fries. Right? That's the clash. First order and second order. My second order desire, I wished I wanted to exercise more. But what I actually desire at the first level is to sit on the couch and watch television. Right? First order desires, second order desires. Some argue, and ethics often assumes, that our lives will be a constant battle between first order desires and second order desires. But Aristotle suggests that the virtuous person begins to desire the right kinds of things. The virtuous person begins to bring together first-order desires and second-order desires. That if I practice enough, if I develop the right habits, at some point I actually desire justice. I actually desire honesty. My natural inclination is to be honest and kind. It's not something I have to fight. Well, I don't want to be kind, but I know I should be. Hopefully I have enough willpower to make me do the right thing. That's the typical view of ethics, right? I'm never going to want to do the right thing. Hopefully I can muster enough willpower to do it. No. This idea is that we can actually shape our characters in such a way that we will want to do the right kinds of things. Not all the time, but more often than not. I desire justice. I desire kindness. I desire love. Do you agree with that? This goes back to human nature. Do you agree that the human person can be shaped in such a way that we might actually desire the right kinds of things? That I might actually desire God's will. Not my will, but your will be done, Lord. Right? Is that possible? Aristotle says yes. We'll see. Chapter 2 starts with this sense of moral virtue. I'm not going to talk too long about this. It's there in the reading. A couple of things though. Moral virtues are not natural. You are not born with moral virtue. You develop it and you cultivate it through habituation and practice. Just like a basketball player, just like a cook, just like someone learning to play a musical instrument. Think of character formation like learning to play an instrument or play a sport or cook. Practice and habituation. What are the core disciplines of this sport? How do I practice them over and over again? What are the core practices of cooking? Do it over and over again. That's how moral virtue is cultivated. So if I know what virtues are, and I think virtue is going to ultimately lead me to flourishing, then I need to figure out what practices will develop the virtues, which will then lead me to happiness. I hope you see that three-step process. Flourishing requires virtue. The development of virtue requires practice. What are those practices that I need to be doing every single day to develop virtue? Right? So that it becomes second nature, that I have the kind of character that desires the right kinds of things. Right? So that over time I take pleasure. And then there's a list of some of these virtues, right? Courage, temperance, discipline, moderation, generosity. The last thing I want to talk about in the lecture is the golden mean. So every virtue has an excess and a deficiency for Aristotle. So virtue is found in the middle, in this golden mean between excess and deficiency. Virtue requires that we do the right thing for the right reasons, at the right time, in the right amount. It's a delicate balance. In one situation, virtue requires me to be silent. I need to know that. In another situation, virtue requires me to speak up and be bold. But I have to do it at the right time, in the right amount, with the right motivation. Right? So the golden mean says virtue is this delicate balance between excess and deficiency, and we have to cultivate character so we know what to do. An example is courage. The excess of courage, Aristotle calls foolhardiness. It means we run into every situation guns blazing, right? The deficiency of courage is cowardice, where I lack courage and so I don't do anything. So you have an excess and a deficiency. The virtue is found in the middle. I'm not foolhardy and I'm not a coward. I have the right disposition to act when action is required. There's a story, right, of a child in the river rushing down, calling out for help. You are standing on the side and you see this child getting pushed down by the river. The foolhardy person, if you were foolhardy, would be just to jump into the river without thinking about it to go save the child. But now you're both in the river, and you both need help. That was not very smart. The coward watches the child in the river calling and freezes because they're panicked and they don't know what to do. Courage has you see the child in the river, and you look up ahead and you see that there's a bridge and a rope. So you grab the rope and you stand on the bridge and you throw the rope to the child to try to rescue them. Right? You acted, but you did so thoughtfully and with rationality. So the virtue is in between the excess and the deficiency. Some questions I have: does every virtue have an excess and a deficiency? Do only some virtues? What does that mean look like? Some interesting questions, but I hope the reading makes sense. I hope this lecture helps. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'll look forward to seeing you online.